All right, so welcome back, everybody. We're about to jump into this first top four match, which is going to be Leonard Craft III versus Tom Vehlewald. Leonard Craft, DaWoblefet being his online persona, who placed, I believe, top eight, or maybe he was just outside top eight at the United States Pokemon National Championships this year and competed in Worlds. Tom Vehlewald took this season off because I believe he had a son born and couldn't really travel, but he's been around the game for a long time, having competed in Journey Across America starting all the way back in 2008. So both of these players are really good, have a lot of history in the game, and have had a lot of success, particularly at the excuse me, particularly at the uh, Game Cafe Premier Challenges in Independence. It's a really great venue because it's really small, but it's stacked. There are currently three Worlds competitors there, and like when there's maybe eight people who show up for the tournament, you got to be good to do well. So this is sure to be a good, entertaining match. All right. Both of these players played in Swiss, and Tom Vehlewald took a 2-0 win over Leonard. Um, we'll get to see their teams in just a moment once the battle starts in team preview. But so what Leonard is using is Ho-Oh, Giratina, Crobat, Salamence, Scrafty, and Chansey. Meanwhile, Tom is using, I don't have a list, but let's see if I can't recall, uh, Salamence, Cresselia, Bronzong, Xerneas, Kyogre, and I believe Smeargle was his final Pokemon. Good to see you, Patrick. Glad you're able to catch us here. All right, looks like we're starting to get the connections going. I'm on my own as far as commentary goes until Ethan gets back, so hopefully I'm not terrible at this. But Leonard's team using some Pokemon that we haven't seen a lot of. I do know that early in the season, Ho-Oh had some success at some New York Premier Challenges because it does such a fantastic job of walling the two big restricteds that were very popular, especially early on, and still are at the end of the season as well, being Xerneas and Groudon, since Groudon can't hit it with its ground type attacks, and Ho-Oh resisting fire, as well as resisting fairy, which tends to be the only attacking types that Xerneas tends to carry, gives it a lot of staying power on the field. So here we are in team preview, and like I said, Leonard, whose team you can't see right now, consists of Ho-Oh, Giratina, Crobat, Salamence, Scrafty, and Chansey. Chansey being another interesting pick that I don't think I've seen used at all this season. But I imagine it's got a lot of support moves, perhaps Thunder Wave, which it can use to really slow down the opponents and give Leonard a chance to outplay. So Tom, on the other hand, a fairly standard team, although it is interesting to see both Cresselia and Bronzong on the same team. Those two Pokemon tend to fill very similar roles, and so trainers tend to opt for one or the other on their team. So it's interesting that Tom selected them both to bring to his team, and I imagine that he just uses whichever Trick Room setter, which I'm assuming is what they're there for, whichever Trick Room setter he feels is stronger in a particular matchup. I'm assuming since Cresselia is slightly bulkier that he'd probably prefer that, bringing it against teams lacking Xerneas, but because Bronzong is able to do big damage to Xerneas using Gyro Ball, that it's there for that. And obviously the team's been working out for him. He went 3-1 in Swiss, so he obviously has something going right. And both players have selected their four Pokemon for this battle, so let's go ahead and jump into turn one and see what they've decided to lead off with. All right, so Leonard going with double bird leads there with a Crobat and Ho-Oh lead. Meanwhile, Tom sticks with a Salamence and Xerneas. So Crobat has been used this season to great effect as a way to really shut down Xerneas. It's got a lot of tricks up its sleeve that make Xerneas' job hard to do. For one, it resists the fairy-type attacks that Xerneas most of the time, it's only carrying fairy-type attacks, which means that Xerneas has a lot of trouble dealing damage to it, as well as carrying Taunt in order to be able to prevent Xerneas from setting up a Geomancy, and even going so far as to have moves such as Haze, which reset stat boost, and some even carrying red cards, which forces Xerneas out to reset its stat boost. There have been a lot of interesting techs that people have used on this one particular Mon just to take on such a dominating force in the season. So Tom goes ahead and Mega Evolves right away. Gonna get Salamence. Give Salamence its ability Aerialate, so it's going to gain some extra damage. And he goes for the Tailwind, which is going to be really helpful because now his Salamence is going to outspeed that Crobat. But since Leonard correctly predicted that Protect on the Xerneas slot and double targeted the Salamence, it took a ton of damage. I do like to point out that Super Fang is an excellent move on support-type Pokemon such as Crobat because Crobat tends to not invest in its training to have a lot of attacking abilities, and it goes more for being fast and bulky to be able to take a lot of hits. But Super Fang always does 50% of the remaining HP on that Pokemon, and so it still gives it considerable damage output, which puts Salamence really low, and if he's using a double edge set, he's only going to be able to get off one double edge in this game before it goes down. And so Tom goes ahead and switches out his Salamence into a Cresselia and goes for a boost with Xerneas. They did play earlier, so he might have a little bit of knowledge on what the move set that Crobat has is, and isn't so worried about getting phased out. And this time the Crobat does go for a Super Fang onto Xerneas, while the Ho-Oh also... it does not target down the Xerneas slot. Instead, it goes into Cresselia. But still, so Xerneas is down to half health. It's not going to take too many more hits, especially since it's only boosted its special defense and not its physical, which isn't going to help it any when Ho-Oh does decide to attack. So currently, Xerneas is boosted. It's got +2 special attack. However, both Pokemon on Leonard's side of the field resist its fairy-type attacks. And in comes the Chansey that I'm really excited to see. I don't think I've seen a Chansey all season. So the +2 Dazzling Gleam was just fired off, and that did not do hardly any damage to that Chansey. It took both the Dazzling Gleam and the Psychic, and it's still above half health. The Cresselia was burned by Sacred Fire and dropped below 50%, and it goes ahead and eats its Citrus Berry. Sacred Fire does have a 50% chance to burn, so that's not particularly unlucky. It's just a coin toss there, but that does put Cresselia on a timer, and so it's going to not be able to stick around forever like Cresselias tend to do since they're such a bulky Pokemon. I would say that right now, Tom has the speed advantage, but since he can't deal significant damage to either of these Pokemon, since Chansey is so specially bulky, and Ho-Oh is also specially bulky and resists the Fairy-type attacks that Xerneas is able to use. But Leonard just goes for a double protect there, getting him a little bit of time off of the timer, as well as stalls out that last turn of Tailwind. So now... Where am I getting feedback from?
Hello, I joined the call.
Ah, excellent. So Ethan's on now. Don't worry about it. So this turn, Leonard goes ahead and fires his Moonblast into the Ho-Oh, looks like he was really hoping to get it off the field with just that one Moonblast, but unfortunately the Ho-Oh survived with a couple HP and is able to pull off a recover, which means it's going to stick around for even longer. Leonard could very well just be going for a timer win at this point, especially once he got the burn on Cresselia and knows it's going to go down eventually. But that could come back to bite him because he's still got 10 minutes of game time that he's going to have to stall out. And if he's not dealing damage, then Tom is going to have time to come back and win this set.
Right. One thing that's also important is Cresselia, with that Psychic, got a special defense drop on the Chansey, which can be very important in Tom breaking through these two bulky Pokemon since he has two special attackers on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be interesting if Leonard continues to go for the double protects and is just playing for time right away. I think he's going to back himself into a corner, so he's going to have to start going for damage at some point. I wouldn't be surprised to see a Seismic Toss on that Chansey, which would give it a chance to deal some damage, similar to how Crobat is able to deal damage via Super Fang.
And Tom is aware of Leonard's stalling strategy, so he goes ahead and switches out the Cresselia, so that way it stops taking that passive burn damage.
And there, the Seismic Toss does come out, so that's going to deal exactly 50 damage to Xerneas. But it looks like one more of those is not going to be sufficient damage to KO the Xerneas. I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell. And then the important thing here is that Tom brought out Groudon, which is going to be really helpful for him, assuming his Groudon uses physical attacks, because both of these Pokemon are going to be weaker to the physical attacks than they are to the special.
Right, Chansey is being threatened by the Groudon right now, but unless Groudon carries a Rock move, which is pretty uncommon because they like to carry Fire and Ground moves, that Ho-Oh is pretty safe right now.
So that's interesting that Tom decides to go ahead and reset his Xerneas. He's like, I've got it boosted, but I'd rather take it off the field than let it get KO'd, because a Xerneas that's unboosted is better than a dead Xerneas. And Groudon goes for a Fire Punch on this Cresselia, and it only not Cresselia, Chansey, and it only does right around 50%. So even though Chansey has really, really low physical defense, it's still, because it's got such a massive HP stat, going to really stick around for a long time.
Chansey is also probably holding the Eviolite item, which gives it a 50% boost to both defense and special defense.
Absolutely. But it is interesting to know that Fire Punch did nearly 200 damage to Chansey, which is enough to one-hit KO almost every other Pokemon that's being used in this format. So I'm sure that's a little frustrating to see how fat that Pokemon is. Now with the Salamence out with very low HP, if it goes for a Double Edge, it's probably going to go down, which is going to put Leonard at a 2-Pokemon lead.
Right, so Salamence is going to go ahead and go for the Tailwind, so that's going to double Tom's side of the field, the speed stat, for 3 turns after this turn. And Ho-Oh is going to go for a Brave Bird, which is going to pick up a knockout on the Salamence. So now Tom, all he has left is his 2 restricted Pokemon, his Xerneas and his Groudon. And Groudon, since it was poisoned by the Chansey last turn, it is now on a timer.
But Groudon goes for the Sword Dance, which is going to be huge because Groudon already has such a massive attack. So now its attacks are just going to deal so much damage. But the question is Tom going to have enough time with Groudon on the field in order to be able to really take advantage of that? Because right now...
So it seems that Tom wants to be able to do damage quicker, so he just goes for the Swords Dance, so that way he can boost his damage on whatever few remaining turns that he has left.
So Tom's a little bit up against the wall here. He's got 5 minutes, and he needs to knock out probably 3 Pokemon in this time because Leonard playing so defensively and so well like that. But also, both of his Pokemon are low HP, so if it does come to time, he'll pretty much have to have the Pokemon advantage and not be content with just having the same number of Pokemon and hoping he has more HP.
Yep, and then the fact that Groudon revealed Swords Dance, it probably has Precipice Blades as the final move, and so it's not going to be doing much damage to this Ho-Oh, since Ho-Oh resists fire and is immune to ground.
Yeah, so he'll have to Fire Punch it, Ho-Oh doesn't have quite as high physical defense as it does special, but still resisting that attack, it's going to be tough to break through.
So Leonard brings in Crobat, and Crobat's coming in at full health, and Ho-Oh has the option to recover. And so, again, like you mentioned, Tom has his back against the wall trying to just knock out Leonard's Pokemon before Groudon goes down to poison.
Yeah, unless Groudon revealed Rock Slide here, I don't know that he's going to be able to do it. Although he does pick up the one-hit knockout with Fire Punch onto that Crobat, but Poison looks like it's going to knock him out next turn.
Ever since the Salamence went for Tailwind, Groudon has the speed advantage right now. So I was able to, even though Crobat is a very fast Pokemon, Groudon is faster under Tailwind.
So it looks like for Tom to pull this game out, he needs to have a Rock Slide on his Groudon. If he doesn't have it, his Groudon's going to go down to Toxic this turn.
Right, and so Leonard, knowing this, just goes for the double protect. So Groudon goes for the Fire Punch, which does nothing, and now it's going to go down to Poison, and Leonard's going to pick up this victory.
Yeah, so this is a really excellently played game by Leonard, especially considering we don't often see Toxic used in VGC matches because the pace of the game tends to be far too fast. But with all his recovery, as well as using Intimidate to kind of weaken the attacks of his opponent's Pokemon, he's able to make it work, and obviously he's made it this far in the tournament, so he's doing something right with that stuff.
Yeah, I find this matchup very interesting because Tom is using the two most common restricted Pokemon in Groudon and Xerneas, and Leonard, on the other hand, is using two that you almost never see in Giratina and Ho-Oh.
So what sort of changes do you think Tom's going to make going into this game 2 in order to try and edge out an advantage over Leonard to take this second game?
I think Tom's going to have to make good use of Salamence and its Double Edge in order to try to break through Ho-Oh and Chansey, because those are both very specially bulky Pokemon that Xerneas is going to have a hard time doing damage to. Ho-Oh, being a floating fire type, also Groudon will have a hard time doing damage to. So I think Tom's going to have to make a good use of Salamence if he wants to break through Leonard's team.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think there's any advantage to him to try and go for more of a Trick Room rather than Tailwinding against Leonard's team?
Well, I think the fact that Leonard chose to bring Salamence to this game, I think Trick Room would be a good option because Salamence is a fast Pokemon. However, Tom did lead off with his own Salamence, so it looks like Tom is embracing the Trick Room mode again. Or I'm sorry, the Tailwind mode again for this game too.
Yeah, so Smeargle's here. If it's a Choice Scarf variant of Smeargle, it's going to be faster than Leonard's Salamence and able to just Dark Void these Pokemon right away. But if it's Sash, it's still faster than Chansey. And so even if it takes a hit from Salamence, it will still be able to get off a Dark Void on them or any other number of support moves that Smeargle feels like using this turn.
Right. And we already know that Leonard has a Salamence side on the Salamence, and very likely is running a Violet on the Chansey. So if Tom does manage to get off a Dark Void, the only thing that would prevent the Pokemon from going to sleep would be a Miss or a Protect, since we know they don't have a Chesto or a Lumberry.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a really risky spot for Leonard to be in, especially since Chansey, I believe it's only like base 10 speed or something, just very low.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to be able to do much to this Smeargle.
So Salamence Mega Evolves and goes for the Hyper Voice, which does a lot of damage to the Smeargle and a little bit of damage on the Xerneas switch-in. And meanwhile, Smeargle, because it did not go down the Hyper Voice, shoots off that Dark Void. Salamence and Chansey both go to sleep. Chansey takes his first sleep turn, and its Healer ability procs, and now Salamence has woken up.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting. I was more expecting to see Natural Cure on Chansey, so that's really lucky for Leonard. Salamence hadn't taken a turn of sleep yet, so it would have been guaranteed to take this turn to sleep and would have given Tom the chance to set up. But now he can't do that quite as safely. He can still follow me with Smeargle to prevent Xerneas from taking a Double Edge, or he can just go ahead and boost up with Xerneas because he feels safe if the opposing Salamence Double Edges him.
Right. Another option for Salamence is to go for another Hyper Voice, which Tom expects, and he goes for the Wide Guard. Hyper Voice would be a knockout onto the Smeargle and do some more chip to the Xerneas. However, Salamence does go for the Double Edge into the Xerneas, brings it down into the red.
So rather than
Xerneas,
boosting, he decides to go straight on the offensive with Xerneas and go ahead and just get that Salamence off the field.
and Chansey wakes up. That's a turn 1 wake up after the guaranteed sleep turn last turn. So it goes for a Seismic Toss into the Xerneas. So Xerneas was below 50 HP after that Double Edge, and Xerneas goes down. So now we see 2 knockouts, and so it's a 3v3.
All right, and so Smeargle gets an evasion boost there. The previous turn, it got an evasion drop, so it's at +1 evasion. Could add some really frustrating RNG mechanics in Tom's favor at this point now. But we'll have to see. Both players are down a Pokemon, which, honestly, I feel like Tom comes out ahead with that trade because against almost all of the rest of Leonard's team, his Salamence, or his Xerneas really wasn't going to be dealing a whole lot of damage. So I think he comes out a little bit ahead, even though losing one of your restricteds is kind of a big deal.
Right. I would argue that holding on to his Salamence was more important than holding on to his Xerneas, because if he had Xerneas in this situation, it wouldn't be able to do much damage to the Chansey or the Ho-Oh. So the fact that he preserved his Salamence, I think, is a very good play on his part. And I would say that right now in this situation, I think Tom has the upper hand.
Yeah, it is worth pointing out that his Smeargle is very close to getting KO'd, and it's not going to take much. And he goes for a Tailwind again, which is interesting to see. I guess he wants to make sure Smeargle's faster. That way he can hit them with Brave Birds. Or not with Brave Birds, I'm reading here. With Dark Voids.
Dark Void.
And so that was a really good turn.
So we see another evasion boost for Smeargle. So that was a very good turn for Tom. He got the Tailwind up, so now we know for sure Smeargle is going to be going first before the Ho-Oh or the Chansey. He got another evasion boost. That Smeargle's at +3 evasion. So if there's a Dark Void miss, it's still going to be hard for Tom to knock out the Smeargle because of those evasion boosts. Not to mention he has Mega Salamence on the field, which will be able to do big damage with Double Edge to either of Leonard's Pokemon.
Now it is interesting to see him double into that Smeargle. I imagine was predicting a switch, or just figured if the Brave Bird KOs the Smeargle, that at least he'll still be able to hit it with a Toxic or something. He'll hit the partner with a Toxic.
If Ho-Oh had gone before the Smeargle, knocked it out with Brave Bird, then the Toxic from the Chansey would have been redirected to the Salamence.
Right. And so I guess either he was predicting a switch or just kind of like doubling up onto that slot just in case he missed the Brave Bird because of the evasion boost that Smeargle had. So it's a little unfortunate that for Leonard that Tom made that protect there with the Spiky Shield. But I do think that Leonard made a good play there with what he'd done.
Right, and Tom right now is taking full advantage of his Tailwind turns. Crobat would normally be faster than Mega Salamence, but because of the Tailwind, Salamence goes first and is able to knock out the Crobat before it can really do anything, thanks to that Hyper Voice.
Yep, and so Chansey here is taking its first turn of sleep. At this point, if you're Tom, do you start playing to timer since you've got a 3-2 Pokemon lead?
I think that's a good way to play it safe if I were Tom. He has a +2 speed, +3 evasion Smeargle on the field right now, and so unless Ho-Oh has a Chesto or a Lumberry, or there's a Dark Void miss, it's going to be going to sleep this turn. And so now Salamence will be able to continue just keep doing damage, since it will be able to go first with Double Edge.
So the Smeargle goes ahead and fires off the Dark Void into the already sleeping Chansey and the Ho-Oh, and we'll see if it's holding an item that's going to let it get out of sleep, and it's not. And so Tom deciding, instead of trying to KO his own Pokemon with Double Edge, he's just going to go ahead and Hyper Voice and just slowly chip these Pokemon down.
Right. Hyper Voice is the safer option in this scenario because Double Edge, while it does more damage, it will also do more damage to Salamence because of recoil. And so if Chansey were to wake up and maybe get a Toxic onto the Salamence, it would be on a very short timer if it were taking Toxic damage and recoil damage from Double Edge.
So here's what what was I trying to say? Oh, if Healer had activated on that last turn to wake up the Ho-Oh, that would actually have been a disadvantage for Leonard, because it's better to be sleeping when Smeargle gets a chance to move, because you can still wake up and attack after Dark Void is fired off. But waking up before the beginning of the turn means you're still in range for Dark Void to hit.
So another interesting thing we saw that last turn is Salamence did go for the double edge of the Ho-Oh, and Ho-Oh revealed that it's holding a Rocky Helmet. So anytime Ho-Oh takes a contact hit, whoever attacked it is going to be taking recoil damage, which is why Salamence is down to 25% because it had the double edge recoil and the Rocky Helmet recoil.
Yeah, fortunately for Tom, this Ho-Oh is definitely in Hyper Voice range. And he's going for that Protect, just hoping to catch the Chansey waking up, attacking into Salamence. He correctly assumed that the Ho-Oh was going to go ahead and protect that turn and didn't want to get knocked out by the Seismic Toss. So that was a good play on Tom's side.
And that last turn, Smeargle got an accuracy boost from Moody. The turn before had an accuracy drop, so Smeargle's now +1 accuracy. So it's able to put both Ho-Oh and Chansey back to sleep this turn because of that speed boost. So now Salamence is going to be free to just do damage this turn without having to fear of getting knocked out by a Brave Bird or a Seismic Toss.
Yeah, and so now if you're feeling pretty good about this this game. He turned around what happened in game 2, and obviously with help of Smeargle keeping his opponent asleep and unable to deal damage, he's really started to take this game. It's going to be tough for Chansey to come back from this, especially because I imagine it's probably Groudon in the back who will be able to fire off physical attacks into Chansey rather than special attacks.
Right, so if Salamence were to just go for a double edge here, that would probably bring Chansey down into the red. Tom rather goes for a Hyper Voice, which is will do a bit more damage now that it's single target. Chansey's down into the yellow because of that crit. So Tom just appears to be playing it safe, not wanting to take any unnecessary recoil damage from double edge.
Right, and since Chansey's HP is so massive, when you take half of the damage that you deal as recoil, even though they're both in similar ranges as far as, they're both in the yellow, maybe a little bit of a third of their HP left, he just didn't want to risk accidentally KOing his Salamence but leaving the Chansey on the field. And so there, Tom takes game 2. We didn't get to see what he had as his last Pokemon. I do imagine it was Groudon. So for game 3, what are you thinking here? What does each player need to do? Because obviously they've played each other a lot. They know their teams well. What's going to be the key to coming out on top in this game 3 and making it to the finals?
So I think the way each player handles each other's Salamences and Smeargle is going to be the key. Tom was able to take the upper hand in that game because he was able to put Leonard's Pokemon to sleep with Dark Void, and Leonard couldn't really take advantage of any sort of recovery moves because his Pokemon were asleep. So I think if Leonard can play around Smeargle's Dark Void and manage to get passive damage onto the Salamence, I think that's going to be Leonard's key to victory.
So do you think Leonard takes a little bit of a more offensive lead in the beginning here? Because so far he's been playing rather passively, and we've seen it work, and we've also seen it not work.
Right, he did lead Salamence in game 2, and he was able to get big damage off onto the Smeargle, but not quite KO it because he had a slow Chansey next to the Salamence. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Leonard lead Salamence and maybe another quicker Pokemon to knock out the Smeargle before it can get off any Dark Void. So if he's running a quicker Ho-Oh or maybe even Giratina next to the Salamence just to try to knock out Smeargle before Dark Void.
All right, and I guess we're going to go ahead and jump into turn 1 here, or turn 0 rather, just seeing who decides what to lead with. And Tom going with the so-called monkey lead of Smeargle and Xerneas. So-called monkey lead because even a monkey could win with Smeargle Xerneas. I do really like this lead. It exerts a lot of pressure to the field because you can't ignore either of these Pokemon. They're going to deal a lot of damage to you either by putting you to sleep or by boosting up and KOing everything in your dreams.
Right, and so Leonard did opt to lead for two quicker, maybe a little bit more offensive Pokemon with Salamence and Ho-Oh. And so if he were to double target the Smeargle slot, he would be able to knock it out before it can put its Pokemon to sleep, but then he would be leaving Xerneas open to boost up with a Geomancy and potentially sweep.
So, one thing, we've seen Smeargle so far, we've seen it use a Spiky Shield, Wide Guard, and Dark Void. And so its last move also could make a big difference here. If it's Follow Me, he could just go ahead and sacrifice it right away to boost up Xerneas and go ahead and bring in something else and try and sweep with Xerneas from turn 1. He elects to Spiky Shield with Smeargle instead, though, and takes a lot of damage on his Xerneas from the Double Edge, but he goes ahead and attacks into the Salamence slot and KOs it. So now we're going to have to see what Leonard elected to do with his Ho-Oh. And he does go ahead and target the Xerneas. So there's another early game trade of a Xerneas for Salamence. Who do you think comes out ahead here?
That was a really good read by Leonard. If Smeargle had done anything but Spiky Shield, Leonard could be in a bad position right now. But because he did go for the Spiky Shield and Leonard ignored the Smeargle, he was able to knock out the Xerneas for only a Salamence and still have Ho-Oh on the field to handle Smeargle this next turn.
Although, like we saw last game, Tom definitely does not need Xerneas in order to win this matchup, especially given that so many of Leonard's Pokemon resist it. Although we do see Giratina coming out this turn, which Xerneas would have been really useful for. So maybe this game's going to go a little bit differently.
Right. So Tom still has his Salamence, which we've seen do big damage to the Ho-Oh. This is the first we've seen of Giratina. So I'm interested in seeing what it can do and why Leonard brought it to this third game and what his game plan about it is.
And we haven't seen all of Salamence. Actually, we have seen all of its moves. He's got Hyper Voice, Double Edge, Tailwind, and Protect. So we're not going to see a Draco Meteor. We still don't know
what Smeargle's fourth move is.
And Tom opting to get Salamence right out of there doesn't feel like it's going to do much good in this particular matchup. We also don't know how fast the Giratina is. It could be slower than Smeargle, which could give Tom a chance to go ahead and put these two Pokemon he's facing to sleep.
We don't know what Giratina's item is. It could potentially have a Lum or Chesto Berry, which would wake it up after getting put to sleep. So Ho-Oh we see is faster than the Smeargle. It gets the Sacred Fire off onto the Smeargle.
And luckily
also Giratina proves to be faster.
Luckily for Tom, that Sacred Fire doesn't burn, putting Smeargle on a timer. I'm going to have to take a second. I've got somebody knocking on my door.
Okay. So Giratina went for a Will-O-Wisp into what used to be a Salamence. However, because Tom switches Groudon in, Groudon being a fire type is immune to burn, and the Will-O-Wisp failed. And so after all that happened, Smeargle shot off its Dark Void, and Giratina and Ho-Oh are now both asleep. So Leonard has the faster Pokemon on the field right now, and he also has a very bulky Pokemon. So even though his Pokemon are asleep, unless Tom manages to set up a Swords Dance, he probably won't be doing too much damage with the Groudon. Smeargle, having put both Pokemon to sleep now, has Tom thinks it's outlived its usefulness, so he brings Salamence back in, gets another Intimidate off onto the Ho-Oh and the Giratina, and now Ho-Oh and Giratina are going to stay asleep, and so now the Groudon is going to move. It does boost up with the Swords Dance. So now, with Fire Punch or Precipice Blades, Groudon is going to be able to do some more damage to the Giratina or the Ho-Oh. The only way Groudon is able to touch the Ho-Oh is with Fire Punch. Ho-Oh being a flying type is immune to Ground-type Precipice Blades. However, now that Salamence is on the field, with its Aerolate Double Edge, it will be able to do good damage to the Ho-Oh or the Giratina.
Yeah, for sure. And so now a potential double target onto that Ho-Oh with a +2 Fire Punch and a Double Edge, even though Ho-Oh is a rather bulky Pokemon and is going to resist that Fire Punch, that's still going to do a ton of damage. However, both of these Pokemon have taken a turn of sleep. So we could see them waking up, and he doesn't want to double into a Protect either.
Right. Potentially either the Ho-Oh or the Giratina, or the Ho-Oh and the Giratina can wake up this turn.
Now, if Tom's feeling really ballsy, he could go for another Swords Dance, get up to +4, and Tailwind this turn, just in case Leonard has like that Crobat in the back to make sure he's faster than Crobat as well. Although at this point, I don't think he's as worried about the potential Crobat in the back as he is the 2 Pokemon he's staring down right now.
Yep, so both Giratina and Ho-Oh have potential to burn with Will-O-Wisp and Sacred Fire. However, because Groudon is a fire type, it doesn't have to worry about getting burned. So that would actually be not a bad play if Tom were to set up another Swords Dance, because he doesn't have to worry about Groudon getting put on a timer with a status move that would burn him.
And this is interesting. Seeing Leonard take the entire 100 seconds there that they're given for a turn. He's got a lot of thinking and obviously wants to not mess up this turn. Obviously, neither of these Pokemon protected, and that Double Edge did a ton of damage to the Ho-Oh. Tom not caring that it is a Rocky Helmet variant and going ahead and targeting straight into it.
So Giratina is going to wake up this turn while Ho-Oh stays asleep. Giratina does manage to get a Will-O-Wisp off onto the Salamence. So Salamence is going to be doing less physical damage now, as well as taking burn damage every turn. And Groudon now is going to be going for a Fire Punch.
And so that Fire Punch taking down the Ho-Oh now, it's going to come down to what Leonard's got in back, which... you know, he's got a bit of an uphill battle here. If his Giratina is a physically based Giratina, as far as attacks go, it's not going to be able to do a whole lot of damage to Groudon. And Groudon's at +2, so it's going to be dealing a ton of damage. If he's got a Crobat in the back, he could have a pretty good play by Super Fanging.
Right, Super Fang would cut Groudon's current HP in half, which is going to be doing, since Groudon's at about 90%, it would bring Groudon down to about 45%.
Nope. Hey, buddy,
Which could definitely put it like in KO range for a potential Shadow Ball or something from this Giratina. So
Leonard is again taking the entire 100 seconds to input his command.
Now, Leonard's a friend of mine, but he should know that since they're doing a 45-second or a 15-minute timer, that not selecting within 45 seconds is breaking the game rules and slow play. Honestly, I would have somebody there tell him that. That's kind of a scumbag thing to be doing right now.
Right, Leonard
not meaning to bash you on the internet, Leonard, but just since the 15-minute timer does assume that you only get 45 seconds rather than 100 to select your move times, I don't know. I don't like to see that. Timer's a win condition. I'm going to stop talking because I can get really bad really soon. Sorry.
Right. So Leonard recognizes that Tom does have the upper hand right now. He's got Salamence, which is faster, and he's got 3 Pokemon left versus Tom's 2. Groudon has already boosted with the Swords Dance, and so Leonard with only 2 Pokemon left recognizes that timer is his only win condition if he wants to come back from this one, because Giratina and Chansey aren't going to be able to do all that much damage to Groudon, while Groudon is going to be able to do big damage back after the Swords Dance. So Leonard is trying to play to his only win condition, which, because this is not a tethered game and we don't have the 45-second turn timer like you mentioned, Whitney, is questionable in this situation.
Yeah. So one thing to note is Groudon probably won't be able to one-hit KO Chansey, even though it's at +2. Which means if Chansey can get off a Toxic and then, get some fancy protects to wear that Groudon down, that Leonard could bring himself back into this game.
Another thing that I think could be important here is Giratina can learn a move called Shadow Force, in which it disappears for 1 turn and then comes back and attacks another turn. So if Leonard is playing for timer, the fact that Giratina can disappear and be immune to damage until it comes back could be important in it not taking damage and just trying to stall out this game.
Absolutely. I do think, though, that he's maybe playing to the timer a little bit too soon because right now, Tom has the Pokemon advantage, and so even to win on timer, Leonard still's got to knock out one of these remaining Pokemon, which could be a tough order given the potential for having really low damage output on the Pokemon that he has.
Right. Since Chansey can only do 50 damage at a time, and Groudon has probably at least 176 HP, best case scenario, Chansey will 3-hit KO Groudon. And if Giratina goes for a Shadow Force, that's a physical attack. Groudon has a high defense. That's not going to do all that much damage either.
All right, so
Tom is
Salamence
actually
goes
going
for
to play
the
it safe.
Salamence goes for the Tailwind, and you were right. The Giratina does go for that Shadow Force there. However, since Chansey already protected this turn, now it's just the perfect time to go ahead and double into it and see if a Double Edge and Fire Punch isn't enough to just KO the thing.
Right. Tom has very little reason to protect now that he has Tailwind up. But another thing is Shadow Force will attack through Protect. So even if Salamence were to Protect, it would still take damage from the Shadow Force. And so it's like you mentioned, now would be a good time to double up into the Chansey. Its Protect would only have a 25% chance to succeed. And so Tom does this. He just goes for the Hyper Voice with Salamence.
It's interesting to see Hyper Voice there. And the Fire Punch is enough to go ahead and get that KO. And so now with a 3-1 lead, although it's probably going to come to a 2-1 lead if Salamence goes down to burn here, playing to the timer is now in Tom's favor rather than Leonard's.
Right, Salamence does hang on, so that's another turn before it goes down. So if Giratina wants to avoid taking damage from the Salamence, it has to burn its Protect this turn.
Yep, it'll have to burn its Protect, and then Groudon is going to be able to hit it with a +2 single target Press of his Blades, which is going to deal a ton of damage, assuming it hits with that 85% accuracy.
Right, and so Salamence just goes ahead and goes for the Double Edge, does a little bit of damage because of the burn, and Groudon's also going to go for that Precipice Blades, which is going to do a lot of damage, maybe even pick up the knockout.
And Precipice Blades does pick up the knockout with a critical hit just for good measure, and that sends Tom into the finals with a 2-1 victory over Leonard. I do think that Leonard played this set excellently. He played to his win condition, and he had his game plan from turn one. We could see kind of where he was trying to go, and just even though he made some good reads, I think playing a bit too passively against such a high damage output team that Tom had is kind of what did him in there.
Right. I think it was a well-played game by both players. Like you said, Leonard played it well. He knew what his win conditions were, but it was just hard for him to overcome the pure power of Tom's Groudon after the Swords Dance and his Salamence.
Yeah, especially a Groudon whose Swords Danced up is going to deal a ton of damage. Even when you've got Recover and Resist, it still does a lot. So that was well played by both players. I'm looking forward to seeing Tom in the finals.
Now, Tom is going to be in the finals, and so next up we have Matt Carter versus John Masters.